topic, I would like to just highlight that these videos are like an overview of each of the chapters. I tend to show examples when it's relevant, and I'll add a bit of what I believe is important. But please also read all the student notes that I provide. And if you've got a BABOK guide, please go and read that chapter so that you can deepen your knowledge and you can potentially share your insights with us in the Facebook group. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to share my screen and we'll start by talking about the Requirements Classification Schema and look at some of the stakeholders that we tend to deal with as business analysts. All right, wonderful. So if we now start by looking at the Requirements Classification Schema. Now, if you're experienced like I am, you would know that everybody seems to have a slightly different understanding of concepts or terms such as business requirements, stakeholder requirements, solution requirements, functional requirements, non-functional requirements, and transition requirements. So the classification schema is there to standardize these terms so that we can all know exactly what we mean when we refer to these types of requirements. So I'm just going to run you through the highlights of this using a metaphor and some examples. So a business requirement. This is a statement such as a goal, objective, or an outcome that describe why a change is being initiated. It can be applied to the entire enterprise, a specific business area, or an initiative or project. In my metaphor, I tend to say that a business requirement is like the Johnson family that has a goal to have a family home in Texas. A business requirement in a more real practical scenario could be the business wants to transform the way they manage employee payroll processing. So it's quite a high-level goal. If we now move on and look at the stakeholder requirements. So according to the BABOK guide, a stakeholder requirement is the needs of stakeholders that must be met in order to achieve the business requirement. So there's a link there. And in our metaphor example, I'm saying that Jane Johnson wants the home to have enough bedrooms for all her children. So in this metaphor, our stakeholder is Jane Johnson. If we look at a real-world example of a stakeholder requirement, as a payroll professional, I must reconcile all salary payments made so that we can validate accurate monthly financial results. So you can see that we're talking about a particular perspective or a particular stakeholder group and what it is they need to be able to do rather than how they would like to do it. Now, if we have a look at another one, we can also have one that says, as an employee, I must receive a pay slip which can provide a salary breakdown details so that I can verify my salary payment is correctly calculated. Now, again, this is from the perspective of the employee. They're not saying exactly how they would like to see their pay slip, but rather just that they need a pay slip so that they can look at the breakdown. So these are quite important points to keep in mind. If we now go and look at solution requirements. Now, these are the types of requirements that describe the capabilities and the qualities of a solution that meets the stakeholder requirements. So again, there's a link back to the stakeholder requirements. There are two types of solution requirements. You've got functional and non-functional. So let's start by looking at functional. So a functional requirement describes the capabilities that a solution must have in terms of the behavior and information that the solution will manage. In our example of the house, we can look at the family home must have an air conditioning unit in each of the bedrooms. And another one could be the family home must have a door for each room. So importantly, in our metaphor, we're looking at things that we would like the house to be able to do for us. That's critical. Now let's look at some real-world examples. So a functional requirement example could be, as a payroll officer, I must be able to add a new employee record to the payroll system so that we can pay new employees promptly. So just important here to note that we're now talking about a specific function we would like the system to be able to perform, namely to be able to add a new employee record. And as an employee, I must be able to print my payslip so that I can include it in a hard copy tax file. Here, the operative word is print. Now, just before I go further, I've had an interesting conversation in the past, and we can continue this conversation in our own discussions. But what I'm saying here is that these requirements are not necessarily complete. There may be a lot more detail that sits behind all of these functional requirements. So don't look at these statements as necessarily the end of the story. There will be a lot of detail that sits behind each of these requirements in the real world. But in essence, the title of these requirements gives you the idea of what the function is we are trying to describe. All right, so now let's look at the non-functional requirement. So these are also referred to as quality of service requirements. So the non-functional describes conditions under which a solution must remain effective or qualities that a solution must have. Now, in our home example, I'm saying here that the family home must be north-facing, or in the family home must be fire resistant. So these are two conditions that we're setting for the family home. So it's not something the home is specifically doing for us, it's a condition that the home is meeting. All right, so just to step back for a second, other examples then of non-functional requirements, these are things like performance requirements, availability, volume, security. These are the types of things that the system has to adhere to in order for it to be a non-functional requirement. Sometimes we get help from architects with that. Sometimes it's not our role, but rather a more technical person's role. Regardless, it is critical to have a comprehensive set of non-functional requirements, and this is very much part of the role of the business analyst. Okay, so let's move then to the last example, or the last type of requirement, the transition requirement. So the BABOK describes this as the capabilities that the solution must have and the conditions the solution must meet to facilitate transition from the current state to the future state, but which are not needed once the change is complete. So that's the important part. In our family home example, the family home must pass a building inspection prior to be handed over to the Johnson family. In the real world, some examples could be a training requirement that says that support staff have to be trained before a particular product can go live. Or often it could be data migration requirements that are often just needed until the migration is done successfully. Okay, so in a nutshell, that is the Requirements Classification Schema. I really urge you to come up with more examples, share some of these examples in our Facebook group, and ask for feedback and advice. It's important to understand these types of requirements, whether you're looking at doing certification exams or simply want to become a business analyst. If you truly understand these requirements, it is a fantastic building block to build the rest of your knowledge on. So just before we finish this short video, let's just run through the types of stakeholders that the BABOK has identified that the business analysts tend to deal with. So obviously it's the business analyst. There's a customer, domain subject matter experts, end users, implementation subject matter experts, operational support, project manager, regulators, sponsors, suppliers, and testers. What's important here is for you to understand the role of each of these stakeholder types, but also to be able to come up with some examples of alternative roles that these headings could fall under. And then let's have a look at 2 specific questions. And it's questions I would really like you to discuss in the Facebook group because they're important questions. The first question is, can the end user and the customer be the same person? Let's discuss that particular question because it's quite important for you to understand what the answer to that question is. And then the other question I'd like you to just take note of, if you are preparing for exams, just be sure that you know what's the difference between a domain subject matter expert and an implementation subject matter expert. So go look that up. You can look it up in your notes or, of course, in the BABOK guide, but get clarity on those. Okay, so your next steps now. Again, I will keep saying this because it's important. Visit your week 1 on your dashboard. You would have received the email that tells you exactly where to find this dashboard, and go and download the student notes that I've provided you. Once you've done all of that, you've read your notes, you feel comfortable, do the short knowledge check and go check your answers. Okay, wonderful. That was a great lesson. I hope it's added value and I hope that it's clarified a few concepts for you. Thank you. Talk to you soon.